Just a reminder that any thoughts, opinions, and points of views expressed during this podcast are those of the individual and not of the Grand Lodge, appendant body, or concordant body that individual may belong.
Hey everybody, Pen&Compass, Jeff Bennett here is your host with my co-host Rodney McGilvery, and we've got Travis Trinca tonight. We're going to be talking to him about one of his books that's been out for a while, and then some other great projects he's got going on. He's a Freemason, and the first time we've had a guest or done an episode with someone in Australia. Very exciting for this particular episode. So, Travis, how are you, sir?
Very good. It's great to be here with the Jeff Bennett and Rod. Thank you for having me, and I'm sure I won't be the last Aussie for you guys to have either.
Well, you're more than welcome to help steer us towards some talented folks, because that's what we try to do. I mean, kind of going back to Pen&Compass, our initial thoughts here were to Freemasonry has all these talented people. And I think sometimes even within the fraternity, it's underestimated by ourselves. We have this almost just like this imposter syndrome. And we have people that are brilliant in so many different ways, and especially in a literary and artistic way, that's what Pen&Compass tries to bring out and have conversations with people like yourself that are creating this and just have these obsessions and these healthy ritualistic addictions that some of us have. So anyway, so we're here because this is a part of our partnership that we're so excited about. Lewis Masonic Publishing over in England. So England, UK is involved, the US is involved, and Australia is involved in this particular episode. And so it's really, I'm kind of blown away. I've been thinking about it, and I'm actually got chill bumps right now, just going, wow, we're getting to do this. And a year and a half ago, when Rodney and I met each other, would you have ever thought of this or dreamt of this, Rodney?
No, this is expanding way beyond my expectations.
Yeah,
It's very exciting.
yeah. So Lewis Masonic, Martin Fawkes is kind of our patron tonight for this discussion, and we thank you, Martin and Kitty, and just everybody at Lewis Masonic Publishing for doing a great job of promoting their authors, their books, and just giving people a voice in a platform and a format to find that. So let's get into it.
I'll
So,
mention
Masonry is truly universal. We've got international representation. All we need to do now is colonize other planets so you can have an interplanetary conversation as well.
well, you shouldn't have said that because there's a Texan on this recording session. And by the way, the Grand Lodge of Texas does have a lodge on the moon that was established by the astronauts. Just saying.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have aliens as members as well?
Um, I know some of the members, and they could be considered that maybe out of this world a little bit. But no, it's until we establish a permanent residence as a world, I guess, or an entity. It now meets around the state of Texas currently. So it's yeah. Anyway, but you brought that up, so I just followed that rabbit a little bit. So anyway, well, Travis is very involved in Freemasonry. He's also involved with Rosicrucianism, which is one of our favorite subjects to talk about here. We like to talk about the Hermetic philosophies, esotericism, mysticism on this program, this podcast, because it's not really talked about publicly. Or, we like to do it in a way that hopefully, if this is your first time being involved, or you're just kind of new and you're trying to find good information, hopefully after this episode you'll feel like you've been fed. So, you're author, researcher, speaker, and you kind of started out like Rodney and myself. You started out as doing just kind of short talks and educational programs and presentations, and things like that, right, Travis?
Yeah, pretty much. Look, in initiatory groups, I begun probably about 20 years ago, as soon as I was old enough to join an initiatic group, and that was prior to joining Freemasonry by about 10 years as well. So I had to experience initiatory groups for quite a long time. But yeah, most of my work from then until recently has just been in the form of papers and presentations, these sorts of things. Um, the first actual published book was released last year, about this time last year, about October, I think it was, 2024, which was The Temple and the Vault.
let's let's talk a little bit about that. Well, there's your. I think this is on Lewis from Lewis Masonic. It talks a little bit about your bio, and we'll get to that in another segment or so. But Temple in the Vault, the theme, the audience, enlightenment, like what's going. How would you describe it?
Well, it was an interesting book to put together. So when I first started writing it, I was doing my master's at the time, and I had just finished. So I was working part-time, I was doing my master's. I finished my master's and I thought, well, that's it, I'm meant to go back to work full time. But decided to just continue on because I still had that academic hat on and started writing and couldn't stop. And this book came together really quickly, actually, 9 months from start to finish. It was almost like a baby. I was going to sleep thinking about it. I was dreaming about it. I was waking up thinking about it. So I knew a lot of the stuff I wanted to write, but it was really hard to sort of put it together into a package and say, well, what is it that I'm trying to get across here? And really, the crux of it is the stories, why we tell the stories that we do. And when somebody joins Freemasonry, we don't just give them an apron and take their dues. We give them a story, and we don't just give it to them to read. We go through this elaborate process where we give them a dramatized ritual reenactment. So the book itself is about these stories. Why do we use them? How do they work? Where do they come from? What makes a good story? What makes a bad story? And how are they utilized in initiatic groups? Because they're incredibly important. And when I first started researching for the book, I was quite shocked I mean, you do research, you try to find out what other books have been written on the subject. And yes, there are lots of books written on the Crump and lots of books written on Holy Royal Lodge and lots of books written on Rosicrucianism, but nothing that was focusing on the use of these stories. To me, it seemed to be the most intriguing part about joining initiatic groups. And I suppose the other reason why I wrote it was as somebody with a bit of an esoteric um, viewpoint or love esotericism, I was getting quite disappointed with a lot of the conversations that were predominating. A lot of people talking about initiatic groups in a very sort of like a condescending way that these stories are just sort of childish. You know, there was some silly forefathers from back in the day. They put together this silly little story, and you know, it's not really historically accurate, but it's just something we do. And so you sort of, I felt these people were missing the whole point. Like there's a whole enchantment and romance behind these stories, and actually they're incredibly important, and they're quite deliberate. They're used quite deliberately. They're not just some antiquated hangover. We're sort of missing what makes them so enchanting in the first place. So my main aim for the book was I really wanted to engage people with these stories and hopefully get people enchanted again, to either find a group that has a story that they really like, or to look at the story within their group and see something different in it, or see something that appeals to them, and realize, you know, why we're all doing this. We're more than just a charitable group. You know, we have these stories for a reason. So as for the audience, it's really for anybody. It could be for people that are not Freemasons at all, but are trying to figure out what it is we do, because as Freemasons, we often get asked by non-Masons, oh, so what do you do in Freemasonry? And it can be quite challenging sometimes to try to say. And it's not so much because of the oaths or anything like that. It's just, gee, how do I describe what we do? It can be quite challenging.
Well, and that's because it's so individualized. It's so, I mean, it's the individual thing. And I think what you have described, I've tried to put into a term. You're more than welcome to propagate this term, um, artistic curiosity. And I think the ones that we're talking about, maybe these are old, antiquated stories that we just kind of do because that's our tradition, and they're kind of there, and they're not really. No, they're not true. It is mythology. It is. I mean, and whenever I talk about interpretations, I'm like, you're not going to find this exactly like it is in the Bible or in the King James version of the Bible. You may find it in other, apocryphy or whatever. And you have people that they think they know everything, and they haven't really read the next three things that they need to read to understand that was the source for this particular group's initiatic rite. And that's where some of this explaining, some of this lecture's coming from or something, and they want to kind of contest that. So, Rodney, what do you have to say about that? Because that's the essence, by the way, Travis. I have to call you Patrick, Travis, about getting this program up and going. Is we wanted people that are out there and they haven't found our tribe yet. They haven't seen the light on inside of the tent. They haven't seen the campfire smoke going on, and it's like, come on in, guys. And I say this almost every episode. It's like, you're welcome. Come on in.
The torch is lit.
We're here, man.
Just I was going to add that your story is kind of similar to mine. I came from an esoteric background, like well before I joined Freemasonry. And while I was in a certain esoteric organization, I was very hesitant and even at one point against joining Freemasonry because I thought it was kind of a dead organization where there really wasn't much esoteric fruit within, and it was just an old man's dinner club. So a book like this would be valuable to similar individuals like myself at the time to really let those know that Freemasonry is alive and well and definitely tied to the esoteric tradition.
Yeah, fantastic, Rod. And I think you're right. And with your own situation, when you said you were hesitant about joining Freemasonry, but you eventually did join, would you say that when you did join then, it was the right time? It was better joining then than having had that esoteric experience than beforehand?
Oh, it was the perfect time because shortly after I joined, I met a certain individual locally. I'll give a shout out, Mike Doxey. Um, he saw some posts I made on the Indiana Freemason Facebook group that were esoterically inclined. He contacted me, made a great friendship, and he introduced me to the esoteric side of Freemasonry. Without him, I don't know where I'd be right now.
That's it's great news. And look, not everybody has that success story. There's so many people that join Freemasonry very early. They join a lodge that has a culture that's not aligned with their interests, and they end up leaving disheartened, saying, "Well, why did I join Freemasonry? That was a waste of my time." It's really sad. It shouldn't happen, but it happens all the time, all over the world. I've seen as well. It's shocking.
Well, I'll say this too. Before I joined the fraternity, there was an individual that was from Haiti that was a part of the other organization I was in, and he was a Freemason from Haiti. He said, "Your next step," because he knew I was going to withdraw from that organization. He said the next step is to join Freemasonry because Freemasonry is magical, and from a Haitian perspective, that's very true. There's a lot of magical roots to Haitian Freemasonry, and it's still alive within the magical tradition currently.
Yes. Look, Freemasonry it provides a lot of structure and grounding, um, but because it is a traditional organization, there hasn't been a great deal of change with a lot of what's happened in there. So it is meaningful. The actions, the gestures, the words, the order of the way we do things. it all has a particular meaning and effect. And I think for somebody that's joining a group that doesn't have that esoteric sort of education, or I would even just say Masonic education in general, to come from an esoteric background really helps, because when you join, you can recognize some things that you might not have recognized before. It shouldn't happen that way. I think in an ideal world, you should join a lodge that, I mean, they should have Masonic education as part and parcel of what they do. So when a candidate joins, they do start to learn, not so much be given answers for the things, but learn how to look at things. And I think that's what Masonic education really is. It's not so much about answers, it's about educating the new initiate to see things in a certain way. And it doesn't happen in a lot of lodges, unfortunately.
Well, I think a movement started, and us here are involved. We're bringing the roots of masonry back to the esoteric masonry, and we're polishing that esoteric lens, so to speak.
That's
That's
fantastic. Yeah.
we're still a
Uh,
little bit from one particular part of Freemasonry, but we have a production group that Rodney and I kicked off or re-kicked off or whatever. Really got serious about it this summer, and the name of it's Once Lost Now Found. And so it's kind of it's been there all the time, like we know in some of these other narratives that we're all been initiated into. It's been there the whole time. You just had to discover it. There wasn't any, and it's a different it's a different employment than trying to build something or shape something. That's a different activity. It's a different engagement. So, getting back to your book, I got the table of contents up here. Would you like to cherry pick any highlights out of that, or kind of talk about the flow of the book or anything?
yeah, maybe I'll talk about a bit of the flow. But first of all, just on your point on what you were saying, I mean, that seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of esoteric stories, initiated stories about uh, you ending up where you first began, but seeing it for the very first time. You know, Harry Potter ends his journey at platform 9 3/4. You've got the Buddhist ox paintings where you end up where you started off. In the Holy Royal Arch, the first time you descend down, there's, well, depending on the story of the jurisdiction you're in, you find something, but you can't read it until the sun is at its meridian, and then all of a sudden you come up to the light of day, and you're like, "Oh, this is what it is." It's always been there the whole time. It's just seeing it for the first time. So yeah, I like that. What once lost, now found. It's a good name. As for the flow of the book, it's three main sections. I've got section one, the use of myth, which I align with the aspirant. Section two, initiatic myths, which is the initiate. And section three, foundational legends, the adept. So in section one, the use of myth, this is where we talk about the use of myths throughout time, use of these initiatic stories. And I have chosen the word initiatic myth here, which is not something that had been coined before the term initiatic myth. Myths are usually used, if you'll be familiar with many myths from Greek mythology or Egyptian mythology, they usually have they work like an allegory, they have emotional meanings, they relate to your relationship with nature. But in Freemasonry, we do have myths in one sense, but we do employ them physically as a ritual reenactment. So that's why we call them initiatic myths, because we do use these allegories that we do have these myths that have an underlying meaning. They can point to resonances within ourselves and into nature, but we employ them in an initiatic setting. So in section one, we talk about these stories from, sorry, I think my phone was thinking I said the OKG word. Um, so we're in these myths are from the dawn of time. Why have they been used? How have they been used? What makes a good initiatic myth? What makes a bad one? So if we were to take the initiatic story that was presented in ancient Egypt and redo it exactly the same in our modern world, would it work? Would it be effective? If so, why? If not, why not? So this is what that first part sort of looks at. And there's a lot of things that can influence it. So naturally, the candidate would be part of it as well. If you have a candidate that is not properly prepared or can't understand what's being said, they're not going to understand what's happening.
Yeah, and so I think with that, there's the there's so much that you said there, especially when you start talking about the Egyptian example. As you were even going through that, yeah, there's all this initiatic school stuff, but there's also those of us that grew up in church and we've read the Old Testament. We've had these, Sunday school lessons in my background, and we constantly are, if you participate on that in those type of groups, you're going to get reinforced with that. I mean, my head blows up and spins around 19 times about the Royal Arch whenever I go to church and I'm in worship and I'm sitting there, and my church is very Judeo-Christian. We think we have a lot of Jewish influence, and we hold up the Old Testament as a valid part of the whole experience. And so with that, I think that's what you're talking about. People that are going, well, yeah, I've been through the degree, I didn't get it. Okay, well, did you go read the Bible verse that was said to you out of the monitor? Did you connect with something that was presented to you? And so I think a lot of times, like, if you hadn't studied Egyptology and their system of gods and their worship and how their government, their culture was structured, no, you're not going to understand it. But there's some ways that you can do that. And so I think that's what's wrong with Freemasonry sometimes, is the Freemason. You know what I mean? I mean, not really wrong, but that's what's lacking, I guess, is they don't have the information, and maybe they're not being, well, we're turning this into what we could do better. But yeah. So what, Rodney?
Yeah,
Your research about the initiatic schools or mystery schools of Egypt, did you come across like the need for it to be inside the pyramid at all? The structure itself, anything of that nature?
no, no. It was more so just talking about the stories like the Assyrian mythology and why it was used in the mystery rites, but more so to show that there is definitely a continuation from the old to the new, and not in the sense that we need to say that there's an initiatic lineage from laying on floors from ancient Egypt and now. That's not the point, but just to say that with mystery rites, even though each mystery rite really, we shouldn't treat them as the same, they do have their own identity and their own personality, their own culture. To try to conflate the Mithraic tradition with the Assyrian, with the Eleusinian, they're all different, but they did have some broad similarities. And those similarities in the way they work and what they're trying to get across is still perpetuated today in Freemasonry and in Rosicrucian groups, which I would consider to be a modern day or contemporary mystery tradition or mystery rite. And I think I mean, I'm trying to justify that in my book, but I know there's many other authors that have done the same thing, and because we really are perpetuating a modern day mystery tradition.
I would have to agree. I personally consider Freemasonry part of the mystery tradition.
Yes, absolutely. So that's all section one of the book. The section two looks at, yes, while we are human, there are themes that are in the Egyptian mythology, Egyptian Initiatic myths that are similar to in Freemasonry. These themes of birth, life, and death are they're universal, they're perennial, they're part of us as humans. There are things that are tied to the culture and identity of the tradition, that there's stuff that we do that they didn't, and vice versa. And in section two, we explore some of the themes. There are some themes that just seem to be recurring. There's a lot of themes like building structures, building buildings, building palaces, building temples, building castles. There's a lot about going into crypts or tombs or vaults. There's a lot about knights in shining armor and trying to be a savior to humanity. Um, and also the Rosicrucian story as well. I think people forget that Rosicrucianism, when the tradition itself, as the Rosicrucians, when that came about, it started off with its own story, which is still perpetuated in some ways. And that's where we get into section 3. I talk about foundational legends of various Rosicrucian organizations. And the reason why these are legends versus myths, legends are something that's pseudo-historical. It's partially historical, it's partially not. And what we find is that in a lot of Rosicrucian societies, when they are established, they start off with a story. Usually a founder coming in contact with some wise people from some faraway land who give them permission to establish the Rosicrucian organization in their own home city, and they usually give them various authority or trinkets or something to establish that. And we find that in many cases, these stories, you can look at them as being sort of, these are just trivial things that were just made up by founders just to sort of bolster their own authority. They say, oh, I came in contact with wise people, but they really didn't. It's all just part of their own imagination. That's one way to look at it. But when you look into it, you actually find there's some truth to the stories that they said and how they were established. And what you end up finding is that they are legendary, but partially it is true. When you look at what the founder said about the people they came in contact with, it turns out they usually did come in contact with a pre-existing tradition. They didn't perpetuate it in exactly the same way, but there is a continuation there somehow. And that continuation is very much aligned with that Rosicrucian story, because that initial Rosicrucian story that appeared in Germany was very much along those lines. It was of somebody that went on a journey to find wise people in a faraway land, who was given some sacred teachings, and he came back to try to perpetuate that. So this Rosicrucian legend is something that we see carried over in Rosicrucian traditions today. Um, there's probably a lot that separates these Rosicrucian traditions as well, because I mean I've only discussed 3 in the book, but I mean there are dozens out there, and you could even make the argument that Rosicrucianism is something that's beyond tradition, which I think is a valid point as well. But that's what we get into in that 3rd section. And the book ends with a treatise called Coming Home, which is so at the end of the day, why are we doing this? Like I started finding that I loved in my research for this book, I spoke to people that were very passionate about a particular group. So I love to talk to people, not so much people that joined 20 groups. Like I like talking to people where Holy Royal Arch for them was what they would consider their home. Like people often describe it like, when I joined this group, it felt like coming home. They're the people I really love to talk to in the research for this book, versus people that were like, well, Holy Royal Arch is just Tuesday for me. And then on Thursday, I do KTs, and on Friday, I do Thomas of Acon. I love talking to people where they have passion. And I think it's very important that we try to find our home. It might be in the craft lodge, it might be in Mark Masonry, but there is a home, I think, for everybody. Um, and how do we find it? I think it's important that we do find it, and I do hope that the book has had an influence. I do hope that people read it and maybe they're introduced to another group and they go, you know what, I really want to join that group. Or they might discover something new about their existing group and say, oh, I didn't realize this before. They're re-enchanted with where they already are. So that's the ending of it, coming home. So I'm just going to grab my laptop charger.
So can I be put on your list of being totally fascinated with one group times about 20? I am fascinated with all these groups that I am a member of. I've been very blessed to be invited to a lot of things. I've put a lot of focus and time in my life in joining and getting involved in different groups. But it all comes back together at some point. So if you're not just attending just to get another meal that night and wear a different tie with the same suit that you had on the night before. Last night we were at a banquet, like we've talked about in the warm up, and it's pretty cool. One of the guys that knows me, heavy acquaintance there, he just joined St. Thomas Facon, and he comes up and he's introducing at the end of the time together, the dinner. He's introducing his wife to my wife and to me, And he just turns to my wife and says, I'm just always so cool to be around your husband because he loves the Royal Arch beyond definition. Something to that effect. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool, and I enjoy being thought about like that because I'm totally obsessed with all four of our degrees within our Royal Arch system. We have Mark Master
Which,
Pass, we have Virtual Past Master, Most Excellent Master, which is an American degree, and then the Royal Arch and its influences with Zerubbabel out of Scotland and England, not the Josiah rebuilding the temple or repairing it in Ireland.
we, we do the most excellent and the exaltation. But would you say then that Holy Royal Arch is your home? That's where you feel home at?
It really is because to me it's the linchpin for everything. I mean, it's the hub, it's the nucleus for everything else. Once you get to a certain level and you've gone past, or not really past that, but the story is kind of proceeded past that. When you come back to there, that's where it's all shifting, and that's where it's all the pivot point is to me. That's where the point is
Yeah,
within the circle to me, because
yeah,
you're,
that's fantastic.
and even in the Bible, literally in the way the Bible's set up with the Old Testament and the New Testament, it's literally set up as kind of that almost midpoint.
Well, I still remember when I became a Master Mason. So in our jurisdiction, Order of Master Masons and Holy Royal Arch are two separate appendant bodies that you can join after you become a Master Mason. So if there are people in Mark Masonry or in Holy Royal Arch and they're looking for members, often they're trying to lynch them at their after their raising, which is unfortunate. Let them have their time to contemplate on the craft for a bit. But look, people are people, and often you'll get approached on your night, and that's what happened to me. And I had one guy come up to me straight after the ceremony. He said, "Oh, Travis, now that you're a Master Mason, you have to join Order of Master Masons. It is where it's where you're going to find out everything. It's the greatest degree, and that's where you're going to find the real secret in Freemasonry, and you'll love it. Don't worry about joining anything else, just join Mark." And then almost immediately afterwards, I had another fellow come to me and say the same thing, only about Holy Royal Arch. Travis, you've got to join Holy Royal Arch. Don't worry about joining anything else. Don't worry about Mark. That's you don't need to worry about that. But join Holy Royal Arch. That's where you can get the real secrets of Freemasonry. And so at the time, I was ignorant of both of them. Well, these guys have just told me the same thing. Is one right, one wrong? And over time, I discovered that in a way they were both right for them. Because if I look at those two men that said that to me, the fellow that told me to join Mark Master Masons, his life is so incredibly rich since he joined the Order of Mark Master Masons. It wouldn't be as good as what it was if he never found that. For him, it really was the greatest treasure. And likewise for the guy that joined the Holy Royal Arch, it was something that was just for him, it and a bit. Um, so in a way, they're both correct, and it's sort of in some ways independent of the actual story. So there is the argument that there is a completion of the story, or you get another facet that sort of completes the puzzle. But I think what these men found, what they were really referring to was something within themselves, or something there that they were incredibly passionate about. And I think that ties into something perhaps even more than just the story. It's the culture, it's the friends they made there, it's the ritual, it's the history. There's all of these things come together to make it their where they really, for them, it's the heart of their initiatic home.
So when people call me Companion Bennett instead of Brother Bennett, or they call, that's when I know that person gets me. And I've asked people, please just call me Companion Bennett, But most people refer back to the brother, and I'm like, well, we're all brothers. I'm like, yeah, but being a companion in the Royal Arch and being a 20, and I joined it right afterwards and then went through a festival, did all these things that people say you can't understand it and you'll never be around that long and you'll demit or you'll fall off for non-payment of dues or something. I'm like, no, I was in the right environment, and it wasn't a highly esoteric environment, but we do the ritual as well as anybody else. And so, in seeing it repeated and doing the full form opening and going through, it's got to be there. You can't just have it, you know, it's not alive if it's just sitting there on a page.
That's right. And it is an incredible ritual as well.
Well, when I say the Royal Arch, I'm talking about like I said, the whole system that we have for the most part in the U.S. Because it's rare for us in our Grand Royal Arch chapter jurisdictions. There's only maybe 10 states that I can think of, or 5 to 10 that have separate marked lodges that allow marked lodges, and I won't go through them all, but there, and one of my bucket list things is to go, especially if one of my buddies is a member there, and to sit in one of those marked lodges, or even, well, let's not say that. My wife might hear me say I want to join another group, so I might be in trouble for that. So we'll not say that definitively. So, well, what were your influences behind this book? You did a great job, by the way. All this I totally stole off of without license from his Instagram. We're going to show his Instagram account at the end of all this tonight, or this episode, and he did a great job especially in the last 6 months or so. I think when you kind of ramped that up and got going on that, and it's an amazing bits of information. So great job, Travis, on that.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I've really started to enjoy. I mean, Instagram was hard at first. When I first started using it, I was asking friends for advice. Like, I didn't. Like, what's the difference between a reel and a post, and what's a story, and how come I can't do this on my computer, but I can do it on my phone? It was all just foreign to me. It was sort of like a labor of just like, yeah, I'm a writer. I've got to promote this book. I've got to do it. But eventually I found a little niche. Like I loved, I started thinking about, well, what post do I like to read on Instagram? So I started thinking of some accounts that I really like to follow. And there were accounts where people would, yeah, tell this would be a small educational carousel or something like that. I thought, that's what I really like. So maybe I'll do the same thing. So I just started, as you do in life, I suppose, you find influences from people that are better than you, and you try to do your best to achieve something that you like. So yeah, probably about 6 months ago, so I really started trying to push out some good quality educational carousels. Um, and I hope people like them, but at the end of the day, I like them and I like putting them together. So I hope other people like them. Um, but yeah, I try to, of course, do the book promotion at the end of most of them. And a lot of the stuff that I'm just discussing in the slides are usually from a book or from a coming book. So there is promotion sort of tied into it, of course, as well. But the creativity side of it, trying to space it out and make it look pretty and everything, I don't know, it feels really, yeah, it feels wholesome. I enjoy it when it all comes together and it happen, and at the end you look at it and you feel proud of having put it together. I don't know, it gives me a good feeling inside, so I keep doing it. If people like it and enjoy it and get educated from it, well, that's just the cherry on top.
So I didn't get past the first influence, which we've talked about pretty well. What are the other 4 influences in this particular?
I can't remember what I wrote. What I wrote.
Oh, okay. Well,
Rituals. I
go,
probably would have.
go out to
I probably would have
Instagram.
mentioned.
Yeah, yeah. So audience, viewers, go out to Instagram after you finish watching this episode and check that out. So
Conversations probably would have been another influence I would have had there. Because there's always just chance conversations you have with people. It's almost like water cooler conversations, but amongst fellow brothers and things. That was definitely another influence. Um, yeah, the stories that are in Freemasonry. There's countless other books. I mean, every time I read a book, and I do read quite a lot, I do try to take a message from each book and make sure that my time reading it has been worth it. And I would say most books I read, they do change me in some way. So yeah, there's quite a few influences behind the book, but yeah, trying to get people enchanted, re-engaged with what makes their tradition so good, what makes it so enchanting. Like find a passion and a love for it. It's not just going out and having dinner. Like there's so much more. Like really enjoy and live what you're doing.
I'm sure your previous experience, like prior to Freemasonry, probably was a major influence as well.
Absolutely, yeah. The Rosicrucian tradition is a huge influence. So prior to joining Freemasonry, there are some Rosicrucian organizations like the Societas Rosicruciana tradition. You do have to be a Master Mason, but there are also Rosicrucian organizations out there where you don't need to be a Freemason. So I did have quite a lot of experience in a non-Masonic Rosicrucian organization, including taking on some leadership roles as well for quite a long time. So I did have a lot of influence from that space as well.
Very nice.
And naturally, there's a lot of crossover. Like this series I'm going through at the moment, the Guardians of the Rosy Cross, these are just people that have contributed to the Rosicrucian tradition in some way. And a lot of the times, particularly like with these two fellas here, it's the lines get blurred. Like when you talk about Michael Mayer, Robert Flood, Elise Ashmole, it's did they influence the Masonic tradition or the Rosicrucian tradition? And at this period of time, the borders between them can be pretty vague. Rosicrucianism then wasn't what it is today. Um,
Well, and that's also the interesting thing about the different degrees and groupings and organization of how the same stories within Masonic ritual. And it's like, well, here's a tracing board that they had in the 1800s, or it was, it was painted on the front of a apron because that's all that they had. That and candlelight and a horse, and to get from place to place. And so that was their visual aids. They didn't have the PowerPoints. They didn't have
yeah,
the Scottish Rite cathedrals with 30 people running stage crew, and another half a dozen guys or 12 guys putting people in costumes to recreate that space and to take. I mean, I think what we haven't really said it is these initiatic myths when they're performed and they're alive, they put you in that space. They're time travel. I mean, we don't really talk about that and amp that up, but we're all the science. It's a science fiction fantasy, and maybe that's where
absolutely.
people can't make it happen. But
Well, that's right. I mean, so many. I mean, with many of the rituals we do, they take advantage of sounds and smells and lights and textures and positions and like we use every sense basically to try to bring the candidate to some sort of experience, to try to make them see a message at a particular level. And we put a lot of effort into doing that. And with any luck, the candidate or maybe the officer witnessing it for the 21st time might all of a sudden just have something click and go, oh, that's what that means. I get that now. And the best part about what we do is that aha moment can happen over and over again. You might see something in the same section of that same ritual. You've seen it 100 times and you see something new for the first time. The ritual hasn't changed, it's been the same, but you see something based on where you're at that level. It's just the incredible power of the work that we do. Um, I think
One of the most important things that you said was that the ritual has not changed. So we're dipping our toes into that current that has been started ancient times. And I mean, we're dealing with the same exact energies they did back then.
That's right. That's right. I mean, we traditional organizations, we don't change a lot over time. And yes, we don't have the same ritual as was done during the Assyrian myth, but a lot of the themes are very similar because we're human. Um, so when you talk about our rituals being like time travel, in a way they are. We create this hermetically sealed sacred space where we can tried to be as suggestible as possible in placing the candidate in a particular frame of mind to understand something at a very specific level. Um, it's incredible. There's a reason why people have been doing these things for thousands of years, because they really are life changing. They change the way you look at life. It's incredible.
Very true.
And
It
they
made
did
me
it
think
without
about,
PowerPoint.
yeah, I
They did
mean,
it without Instagram.
yeah, but they had tracing boards. They had a, I mean, they had props, and I'm not downplaying, but actually, as you're describing that, we have another project that's going on that we're trying to get out into the world, and it's a more focused Freemasonry music podcast. And I was thinking about how, as soon as music came into the world, especially stringed instruments, how is the harp or the lyre or whatever not that much different than a 12 string electric guitar, or a
Yeah.
double neck electric string guitar, a 6 and a 12, there's really not, in a way, when you get down to it, there's not that much difference. You can't play that many different notes that the human ear can hear. There's not that many sounds, the vibrations, the frequencies. And I think we try to not, we try to make it more complicated than it really is. I mean, or at least I try to simplify it because maybe that's what I need. But that's a whole nother conversation, Rodney. So,
Well, like Robert Flight there on the right, one of my favorite images that he used was he referred to it as the celestial monochord. It was sort of like his take on the Pythagorean monochord. But he had this image, and it was of a single stringed instrument, which he called a monochord. It was a one string, and it was attached from the heavens, and you see a hand of the divine coming out of the clouds, tuning it, and the string goes all the way down. And along the wooden board that's along the side of it, it's showing the different octaves. So it shows the sort of the celestial and the planetary realms all the way down to the most dense, which is furthest away from the divine. But it was his way of illustrating that the whole of the universe is this spectrum from most dense to the divine, where there is these connections and there is the sympathetic relationship between the octaves of each of these. So you could use that to its most mundane to talk about how like color therapy, for instance, how certain colors can make people feel certain ways. But in music, it takes on such well, in all art, I suppose, takes on this huge influence where particular sounds and progressions and intervals, they produce a feeling. And people like Robert Flood, for instance, would have said that that influence would extend beyond us. They would say that particular notes and sounds, they might resonate with certain organs of our body, but they might also resonate with certain planets or celestial bodies. And some of the practical alchemists would take it a step further and talk about the relationship between those octaves and material elements and plants. And if you wanted to pick a particular plant, you would pick it at a certain time that the heavenly bodies that are guarding over that plant would place it at its most active period, for instance. Um, this is how these people looked at the world. And I don't think it's an entirely incorrect view of the universe. Like in practice, yes, like, okay, well, our medicine has certainly advanced a lot, but in many ways, we still have this same relationship. You listen to a song now and it produces a feeling. You listen to a song then and it produces a feeling. And that feeling is pretty human. It doesn't matter whether you're listening to that same interval of those two notes from 1,000 years ago, if you hear them now, that same primal feeling is still there. Um,
well, we've
yes, it
just
can be very
transferred.
complicated, but it's also very simple.
Well, and here's another modern example. Raise your hand if you've watched a YouTube video that's sitting there in a certain megahertz to help you study or to help you think or whatever. I mean, I utilize that sound therapy all the time. And I'm getting to where, I use it in my day. I actually need to incorporate it just like I maybe would supplements or vitamins or prescription medicine or whatever, um, to deal with my own health, mental health, physical health, whatever. I mean, there's a certain euphoria whenever there's that vibration coming through you.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that,
So then I wonder in our rituals when we have certain sounds or certain smells, um, I wonder then whether those have an influence upon us in certain ways as well, very subtle ways that we might not be at first, we might not be consciously aware of, but there's an influence there nevertheless.
Rodney.
yeah, the whole ritual experience, it's supposed to include all five senses, which unfortunately a lot of lodges do not incorporate. Like you got the incense, you got the music, you got the
Whoa, whoa, whoa! We can't talk about those things
I know, I'm
in Freemasonry. What are you
you know,
doing? You're going to get us in trouble. You're going to get us thrown out of like our grand lodges.
calling Grandmaster right now. No. But yeah, I mean, we are told in our degree work to influence all of our senses because it puts you in that euphoric mindset where it actually expands and changes your consciousness.
Well, yeah, some Freemasons think when you're talking about the five senses that they hand you a nickel. 5 cents. Sorry, maybe that didn't. Maybe that didn't. Oh, that was a U.S. That was a little bit of a U.S. reference there. Yeah, 5 cents is a nickel for us. So
And right there we see the
yeah,
importance of cultural relevance for
yeah.
initiatic myths. Oh, I mean jokes.
So I've got some. You had a whole 6-part series here, and so I had
This
some.
one's still ongoing, so I do have some more people coming up that I haven't done them yet.
So
Yeah.
these are separate books right now.
No, these are just things I've done on Instagram, just carousels for Instagram, where I go through their relevance to the Rosicrucian tradition and then advertise my upcoming book on the last slide. But a lot of the things that I discuss in the slides, most of them are sort of snapshots that are taken from the next book.
Well, and also it's a lot of the lithic. I had downloaded all those, and then I kind of didn't prepare enough time to do everything, and I don't know if we'd have wanted to go through that uh, on a podcast. But each one of these, Rodney has another inside of his Instagram post. It has like another 8 photos or kind of power. It looks very much like a PowerPoint, Rodney. And so with that, the interesting thing is Rodney and I have talked about this to incorporate this into Pen&Compass, and maybe we can find a scheduling time to do some of these with you, but to do some shorts or clips or whatever, to where we take 5 to 10 minutes and you interpret for us one of these lithographs that's been out for a couple hundred years, and you give us and it would be even fun to, because I sometimes am less educated in those areas. I'll be the first one to talk about that, and it would just be interesting to me to see what you see when you see in there. And I'm like, oh, well, I didn't realize that. I hadn't read that much about alchemy or that much about Kabbalah or Rosicrucianism or whatever, or I hadn't read that. And it's kind of the same things that you're talking about. But
Yeah, that's right. They're sort of like tracing boards in many ways. Like you look at some of these old plates that are in these old books, and they're like a mandala. They're a contemplative device. You sit there and study it, and to me, that's one of my favorite forms of Masonic education is if you can get people in a room together, all concentrating and contemplating a particular thing, whether it's a tracing board, whether it's a catechism, and not just doing a catechism where it's, just going through the questions and answers, but allowing space for people to say, hang on, why? Why is that the answer? Because there's always, I mean, you go into any lodge of Freemasons, there's always going to be some smart people there that have answers. And there's nothing better than a lodge where people are encouraged to ask questions. Well, why is that? Why is that? And allowing people to share their own thoughts. And a lot of these old plates that you see in these books, they really are like a tracing book, like a mandala.
so Valentine, is it's a Valentine guy that did a lot of these,
Mhm.
to be honest?
So
That's Basil.
Valentine
That's
Andre,
Basil. That's Basil Valentine. I'm sorry.
Valentine's the alchemist.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
This, yeah, Johannes Valentinus, he's more of the philosopher, Rosicrucian.
so Elijah's Ashmole, Travis, I think it's an Allied Masonic Degree Council in Kansas that our first episode 1, Patrick Carr, he's actually, I think they either founded that before or after, anyway, he's a member of that. And so I was like, he was talking about that one day, and I was like, I've never heard of the guy. This is about a year ago. And so he's like, oh, and so it's cool whenever people name things after kind of historical figures. We do have in Texas an Allied Masonic Council that's named after Manly P. Hall, which some people might. No, nobody that I know of has ever gone to this extent of naming a Masonic group after Aleister Crowley, but I'm sure there's somebody somewhere that would love to do that in regular Freemasonry. But
Not a good idea, but
that would be fun.
Well, I mean, that's part of the reasons why I've done this series of this Guardian series is because we hear a lot of these names a lot. We come across them, but wider, Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton. Why did all the Rosicrucians at the turn of the 20th century talk about this guy? Why were they interested in his book Zanoni? Like, not many people actually go that step further and go and read Zanoni and look at the influence that he had. It usually just takes nerds like us to be passionate about these things and go out and investigate it. And then all of that information that we have, all this wisdom we're amassed, it just stays in our brain and it doesn't get shared. So I tried to thought, well, a lot of these people, like, I'm a bit of a nerdy guy when it comes to the Rosicrucian tradition. I've read Eckhart Tolle's Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, and I've read Zanoni by Bulwer-Lytton. This is a good opportunity to actually show people why these people had the influence that they did. Because historically, there is a huge influence. Like, we wouldn't be in the space we are now if it wasn't for these people. But also, what they had to say was actually incredibly relevant and just as inspiring today, even though the language can make it a bit of a challenge. So it's much easier to go through 7 or 8 Instagram slides than read a 500-word poem like Zanoni. And certainly if I'm not saying that the slides are better than Zanoni, it's not, but it's better than nothing. It's a bit of a summary of their influence.
I mean, everything like that has a commentary. The Bible has a commentary. Shakespeare has commentaries. I mean, there's all this good literary criticism, and I think that's what you're doing here. I did a real quick survey, like I said, for a couple hours in prepping for this recording session today, and I found it to be, for my level of knowledge, a lot of times I'll engage this through a YouTube video or try to listen to another podcast or something, and it just gets to be overwhelming because they're jumping back and forth between this, and it would be like me trying to explain something in Texas to a non-Texan, and like, well, you know where this is at. It's like just north or southeast or whatever, and people are going, no, I don't know, I don't get that, Jeff. But I think you did a great job in these, and you kept them, I think, under 10 like divisions within one of these posts, and something like that. Very, very well done, and highly would recommend this, especially for, and even somebody that's maybe, I know about this. I'm a past novice. I don't know if I'm adept at it, but I'm somewhere between acolyte and novice, and full-fledged own it. I think you did a great job of that too. I think wherever they're at, they can engage it.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a real honor. Thank you. That's great.
This makes you want to download Instagram again because I deleted it years ago.
Okay. So let's take a break here, and we'll come back for another segment. We'll talk a little bit more about your Masonic background. I know you've done that on other podcasts. Maybe we'll talk about Masonic education and some things like that. And then we're gonna really make it to where your head won't fit in your house anymore, and we're gonna blow up your ego of all the awards you've gotten going and all these great things. And we've got a few more segments to do, but we're gonna wrap this one up and come right back after this.